Thank you very much. I'd like to call this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Black.
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblywoman Carlton. Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chair Watts.
And I am here. All right. Members, before we begin, a quick reminder to please mute your microphones when you are not speaking to minimize background noise. I'll go through a few quick housekeeping items as usual. Members of the public can participate in our meetings in a variety of ways. Information on how to do so can be found on every meeting agenda for our committee, as well as on the help page at the legislative website. You can find a link to the help page in a header at the top of every web page over there. Participants must register to participate and can submit opinion polls or sign up to provide testimony via phone. Written comments can also be emailed to our committee secretary before, during, or up to 48 hours after the meeting. Committee exhibits and amendments must be submitted electronically in PDF form to our committee manager no later than 4 p.m. the business day prior to the meeting. Amendments must include the bill number, a statement of intent, and contact information. All exhibits can be found on the Nevada Legislature's website, where you can also sign up for personalized legislative tracking. We ask that testimony and public comments be kept to 2 minutes so that all speakers can be accommodated and we can get through our agenda in a timely manner. And with that, we will have some motions later on. So just a quick reminder to members, please also add your name when you're making or seconding a motion. It helps me recognize and make sure that we have the record clear. So with that, we are going to, I think, start with our bill presentations. Again, I just like to note we do have a quorum, and I will try and take note when Assemblywoman Carlton arrives so we can mark her as present. With that, we'll start with our bill hearings for the day. And I'd like to start by opening the hearing on Assembly Bill 146, which revises provisions governing relating to water. Welcome back to the Natural Resources Committee, Assemblywoman Peters. Whenever you are ready, you may begin your presentation on AB 146.
Thank you, Chair Watts and members of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. For the record, I'm Sarah Peters, representing Assembly District 24 in Washoe County. It's my pleasure to present Assembly Bill 146, which revises provisions related to water pollution, especially water pollution resulting from diffuse sources. Before I begin, I would like to note that due to various constructive stakeholder discussions, I'm proposing an amendment, which should be available on Nellis now. I also sent both amendments to both bills I'm presenting today in an email earlier. With the chair's permission, I will provide brief background information and a summary of the bill as introduced before I discuss the proposed amendment. As you know, Nevada is the most arid state in the nation. As such, water is our state's most precious and limited resource, and protecting its quality is of profound importance. We all depend on water for everything from drinking water to irrigation for agriculture, economic development, recreational use, and to sustain the unique and marvelous wildlife of our state. It is of utmost importance to protect our water, and one of the biggest threats to our limited water resources is pollution. When we think of water pollution, often an image comes to mind of large pipes that dump waste into rivers or streams. This is called point source pollution. However, the leading cause of water quality impairments in Nevada is not from these single source pollutants, but rather pollution from diffuse sources, which is also called non-point source pollution. This type of water pollution is generally caused by runoff, precipitation, drainage, or atmospheric deposition, or the falling out of contaminants from the air. Often snow melt or rainfall carries various pollutants like chemicals, bacteria, fertilizers, and sediment through the ground into our groundwater, rivers, and lakes. These pollutants can stem from agricultural production through excessive use of herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers to acid drainage from abandoned mining operations. And there can also be runoff in urban areas from improperly managed construction sites, faulty septic systems, landscaping, fertilizers, and improper disposal of pet waste and toxic chemicals. Additionally, air pollution can play a major part in the creation of acid rain when sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides from exhaust fumes combine with water in the atmosphere. Diffuse source pollution is not only the main source of water pollution in Nevada, but it is the leading remaining cause of water quality problems across the nation. Assembly Bill 146 enhances the authority of the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to identify and prevent pollution to our state waters by expanding authority over all diffuse sources and infiltration of pollutants to our groundwater. The bill also places a strong focus on biological and cultural resources during the development of regulations and enhances considerations of historically oppressed and marginalized communities. Finally, AB 146 codifies the practices of consulting with tribal governments during regulatory and permitting considerations concerning water pollution. We direct the committee to the proposed amendment. As previously mentioned, the proposed consensual amendment before you today is a result of many constructive discussions with the responsible agencies and impacted stakeholders. I'm committed to continuing these discussions to further flesh out and refine the proposed amendment to AB 146. The purpose of the amendment is to clarify definitions and intentions, to remove language obligations, and to remove language obligating the state to adopt certain constraining standards. As such, the amendment removes the language in Section 2, subsections 1 and 2 that require the state to establish a new program to reduce control and mitigate water pollution from diffuse sources. Instead, the amendment requires the state to increase the mitigation of pollution from diffuse sources by carrying out efforts outlined in subsection 2 of Section 2. The amendment further deletes Section 3 and exempts septic systems from the provisions of Section 4, subsection 1D. To ensure the legislative intent is captured while establishing a baseline for regulatory development and agency decision-making, the proposed amendment further defines disproportionate impacts in historically oppressed or marginalized communities as found in Section 4, subsection 3B, and Section 8, subsection 1B. Similarly, the proposed amendment establishes a review requirement in Section 7 of the bill regarding what qualifies as resulting in the degradation of biological, cultural, or wildlife resources. The amendment also clarifies that the purpose of imposing numeric water quality criteria found in Sections 2, 10, and 12 for major categories of diffuse sources is intended to function similar to total maximum daily load standards set on certain water bodies, which is already included in the statute within Section 12. Lastly, the amendment would remove the requirement to assign drinking water quality standards to all waters of the state as found in Section 10, subsection 1. It would also add revisions to Nevada revised statutes 445A.305 to describe the legislative intent to increase water quality through state programs to address deteriorated water quality in streams that are not recognized as having a beneficial use of drinking water. And with that, I will take any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Assemblywoman Peters. With that, we'll open it up to questions on AB 146. Members, I don't see anybody in the chat right now. All right, I believe we'll start with Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Assemblymember Peters, for bringing this forward. It's a very in-depth bill, and so I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And the amendments, I really appreciate you getting that to us as well. My question, I believe, has to do with Section 5.2. And keep in mind, I am not a water engineer, and so I'm still learning all this fun stuff. When you utilize, though, the phrase of any affected community for the digital format, does that mean that it would be available to general areas of the public, or does that mean that it would be sent out? I guess I'm really looking for a little bit more of definition for that phrase that is utilized on section 2 or section 5.2. If you could clarify that for me. And I realize that is nowhere near what the really important part of this bill is. It just happens to be the easiest area for me to wrap my head around right at the beginning.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Sarah Peters. For the record, well, let's see. So a digital format that is generally accessible in the area and to the affected communities. So when we think about where some of these standards are set, it's not always in an urban area where people have access to broadband or other digital formats. However, that may be some of the only way people have access to news in certain areas where they don't have regular newspapers or sources. And at this point, we have access to our pocket computers and digital devices.
Right.
And I know that the division currently uses things like Facebook and other places to post information that is more accessible to the general public in some cases than a newspaper would be. So this is just kind of authorizing language to and requiring language that they attempt both efforts, so that the public is as involved as they can be in these processes.
Thank you. And again, I'm such a novice at this, so I really appreciate that succinct way of explaining it, and that makes so much more sense. May I ask a second question, Mr. Chair, if I may?
Proceed, follow up.
Thank you. So with the amended language, with the removal in section 10 of that requirement and instead adding that into a different area, may you kind of walk us through a little bit of the reasoning behind that, if possible, because that was something that actually I was kind of interested in a little bit more. If you could kind of walk us through a little bit more of that decision.
Of course. Again, Sarah Peters for the record. Thank you for the question. This is a piece that I am long-term committed to, that all waters in the state of Nevada have beneficial use of drinking water, or that we are creating accessibility to drinking water from all sources at the least cost possible to all communities. So this was a conversation starter, I think, to have with our regulatory bodies and the authorities who are engaging in treating water across the state. One of the things that we see in our state, which is unique to other states, is this idea of terminus water bodies, right? That all the pollutants that go in, they don't come out unless they're removed. Right? We don't just dump them into the ocean and leave it to dilution to deal with, right? We have to deal with everything that goes in. And the burden of cleaning that up often ends up on the beneficial user, right? Not often, always. And I think as decision makers and regulators in the state, our obligation is to ensure that our decisions do not result in the unintended consequence of increased cost to access to something that is essential for life. So that's why this was in the bill in the first place. We have since removed that because as you will hear in testimony, the cost of treating water is a huge burden. And the technology to treat the types of pollutants that we see in our water bodies has not kept up with the demand for treatment. And so this conversation is not just about who deserves clean water. It is about how do we get there as a state? How do we invest in technologies that can get us to the point of establishing those drinking water availability across the state? And those are much broader conversations than what we could establish in this regulatory session, or in this, legislative session.
Thank you so much for that clarification, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. And thank you. Just an observation to start with that. So you're removing section 10. So you're not going to look at assigning drinking quality on all waters in our state?
That's correct. Sarah Peters for the record.
Because I had significant concern about the stream where I run up every day to my canyon. That drinking water, we don't drink that because Giardia is in there, because the deer and the sheep bring the quote unquote beaver fever through there, and having that all waters is a reach. So I appreciate you removing that particular standard because of issues like that. My question on the bill itself, I don't think you've removed, and I've looked through and thank you for getting the conceptual amendment before us in time to look at it. But on the bill as it's written, not on your amendment page, on section 8, number B, the language that's in the bill talks about otherwise provided in this paragraph that the discharge or the injection of fluids through a well for which the permit is sought does not disproportionately impact historically oppressed or marginalized communities. In our area where we irrigate and where we have an irrigation district, we do, and I think believe in Southern Nevada and perhaps the mining industry, they use water, then re-inject it back down into the aquifer. And so would this impact, would they have to treat that before they re-inject that? Is that how I'm reading this?
It's Sarah Peters for the record. Thank you for the question. And no, not exactly. So this piece of the legislation is related to the confluence of groundwater and surface water, or the confluence of aquifers between uses, right? The injection source and the beneficial use source. So one of the things that we have seen is a down gradient, which is down the flow of water in an aquifer. I'm trying to offer non-technical language for the folks who may not be familiar with groundwater basins. So I apologize if it sounds elementary, but so we see that in some cases, there are communities that would meet this historically oppressed and marginalized community definition that see the impact of those injection contaminants in their groundwater for drinking or in their surface water when they go to put it to beneficial use. This would codify that impact is unacceptable in the state of Nevada, and that the entity injecting those fluids would be required to mitigate that contaminant loading into the aquifer that is resulting in the contamination of downstream uses. This follows a standard in the state, and I think maybe Alan would be able to talk about this, of the right to use of your water rights, right? And that the impact of other of anthropogenic things to your use is like a trespass issue. There's a legal like standard for that. So it's not really changing much. It's just making it an authority of the state to identify and say that this is not an okay way to inject water, and we need to control it from the source.
Thank you for the explanation. Just to be clear, I have surface water rights, I have groundwater rights, and I'm on a domestic well. So I get the whole issue, and I also understand what irrigation districts are doing and aquifers, and I just have some concerns regarding that paragraph and the potential ramifications. And so if I have a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, and just for the everyone's information, we'll have you follow up, and once your line of questioning ends, I'll turn things over to Mr. Amburn to see if there's any additional clarification that he would like to provide.
Great, thank you. It's on the same paragraph, because I'm just wondering about a definition anywhere in statute on what a historically oppressed or marginalized community is.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah Peters, for the record, it is undefined in Nevada statute. We looked into that. And I actually asked an organization to pull language from other states where they have defined things like this. And you would be surprised by which states have actively defined these kinds of communities in their statutes. I again worked with legal staff on what it would look like to define that particular phrase in statute. And I'm actually going to ask if Mr. Amburn can discuss a little bit more about whether that's necessary or not.
Take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Watts. Alan Amburn for the record. I will address each of those points in turn, Assemblywoman Titus. So the first one, dealing with your initial question just as to the scope of paragraph B of subsection 1 of section 8. So what section 8 is talking about is that a permit that is issued, it has to comply with certain standards. So if you look at that new paragraph A, that existing law, such a permit has to comply with various limitations and standards in the discharge or the injection of fluids. And so what paragraph B is basically providing additional standards, but instead of having them be broad and far-reaching standards, it's limiting the scope of the standards in paragraph B. So that way we're talking about that the discharge or the injection of the fluids through that well does not disproportionately impact historically oppressed or marginalized communities. So that is the scope of the applicability of paragraph B. If it deals with something outside of that scope, then paragraph B would not apply. Additionally, paragraph B provides that the provisions of this paragraph do not apply to the extent that the requirement would conflict with federal law. So if there was a federal provision that would trump this provision, then that federal provision, of course, would apply. So if, for example, you on your property had a well and you were wanting to discharge or inject a fluid through that well, as long as, that's not impacting a marginalized, disproportionately impact historically oppressed or marginalized communities, then this paragraph would not apply to that activity that you would be conducting. As to defining that term, as the Assemblywoman Peters put it, that term is not defined in statute. So this would be a new definition if the committee or the Assemblywoman or other stakeholders decided to define that term. If it is undefined, then the court would, of course, go through the process of statutory interpretation. So the first process would be looking at the plain meaning of the statute to figure out, can we determine what a historically oppressed or marginalized community is on the plain meaning of the language? It seems a bit vague on its face, and if the court determines that it is vague, then the court would look at the legislative history. They would look at other exterior sources to try to figure out what are the parameters of this term. So it might even look to the historical aspects of the state and try to figure out what type of communities would fall under this type of category. Of course, if the committee or the Assemblywoman or stakeholders decided to define this term, then the court would have that definition as a parameter in which to analyze the applicability of paragraph B.
I would like to add, if I may, that the application of this in practice is very difficult to prove that a contaminant has come from a single source. It takes an effort to do that. So this I think would be limited to cases in which a community was really desperate to figure out what was going on with their water supply. And we've had experiences like that. I mean, you can think about the Fallon arsenic contamination, not arsenic. I'm thinking about the lawsuit around the chemical contamination of the aquifer in Fallon. There was a movie about it. But that happens regularly, right? And disproportionately impacts our rural communities in Nevada. Sorry, and that was Sarah Peters for the record.
Just for clarification, are you referring to the leukemia outbreak in Fallon and the suspected contaminants, which they never actually showed or proved? Just for clarification. I understand what you said. There is contamination in our water. We certainly know from the mining, the traditional mining out of Dayton, and the Carson River itself with the mercury and other chemicals, whether it's from a natural contamination or definitely from mining in those days. So it does happen. I understand what you're trying to say. I just wanted to make sure that we did understand the legislative intent, that we clarified this language. And because it is, as our council said, it is new language. And so when we open this up to things of that nature, I think it's important that we get the legislative intent on the record. So thank you for the questions, Chair Watson. Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you. And Assemblywoman Peters for the record, Nevada is behind in defining these. There are states that have had definitions for communities such as this in their statutes since the 1970s.
Thank you for that, Assemblywoman, and we look forward to seeing the definition outlined in the conceptual amendment as your work on that continues. I believe I also had a question from Assemblywoman Cohen, Vice Chair Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman, for the presentation. So I wanted to go back to septic systems in Section 4. Why are we exempting them? Because can you explain how if they aren't an issue, what I'm kind of missing?
Assemblywoman Sarah Peters for the record, they are an issue and they have become a huge issue in certain areas. However, the purpose of this particular piece of legislation was not directed towards that relationship of septic systems and drinking water systems. There is legal standards for trespass in those cases also, and those are being actively litigated in some areas. And I, in working with the agency, was uncomfortable with trying to define those here with so many issues occurring around those areas in different jurisdictions.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have a question from Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was happy that my colleague brought up Section 8, because that was some of the concerns that I had and about mining and the discharge. And what they do is they bring it up and put it right back into the aquifer as clean as it was when it come out. And I'm hoping we can get people out to take a look at the systems they have. It's unbelievable. But I do have a question, and maybe I'm overreaching this, but in my mind, but say you've got water that's or you have water that's going into a creek or a river or something like this, but yet there's a large subdivision of partials out there like mobile homes, and they have all these septic tanks. So say there's 1,000 homes out in an area, and they're all into septic systems, but eventually it leaches back in and it goes into the water, and then maybe go into a creek or a river. So if that's the case, would this fall under that?
Under Section 8.
Well, I just anywhere in the bill.
Oh, okay. Assemblywoman Peters for the record. Because we actively exempt them from Section 4, which is the regulatory development of infiltration of contaminants into groundwater. And again, that language hasn't been fleshed out yet. So I'm happy to work with folks if we want to try and develop some kind of way to handle septic systems, but at this time it would not apply to them. I guess I would also defer to Mr. Ambering if he has any additional input from the legal side.
Mr. Amburn, do you have anything to add on this?
Thank you, Chair Watts. Alan Amburn for the record. So just walking through the bill, currently, without the exemption in Section 4, there could be an argument made that that could potentially apply to septic systems, but septic systems are proposed to be exempted in the conceptual amendment from Section 4. There might be other places in the bill that could potentially apply to septic systems. I'm looking at maybe Section 7, where we're talking about which would result in the degradation of biological, cultural, or wildlife resources. But in order to carry out the intent of exempting septic systems, what we could do is basically just walk through the bill, and if there is a place where it's unclear whether or not that would apply to septic systems, we can explicitly exempt a septic system from that provision.
And thank you. And that's my whole intent, is to make sure that they are exempt, because it'd be impossible. And but I'm glad that we got the mining issues on the table and we spoke about that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ellison. Are there any other questions from members on this bill? Right. Seeing none, thank you for the presentation. With that, we will move on to testimony. We'll start with testimony in support of Assembly Bill 146. As a reminder, in order to provide testimony, you must register in advance on the legislative website, where you'll be provided with call-in information. We're asking that testifiers limit their comments to 2 minutes. And with that, I'll turn it over to our broadcast and production services to see if we have anyone in the queue.
Exempt.
Testimony in support of Assembly Bill 146.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on Assembly Bill 146, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits 155, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI CABRERA. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League, here in support of AB 146. As the driest state in the nation, Nevadans place a high value on our water resources. The state has a responsibility to protect the quality of Nevada's water, to ensure that all Nevadans have clean water to drink now and in the future. According to the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, non-point source pollution is the leading cause of water quality impairments in our state. Yet the state currently does not have all the tools it needs to address the source of pollution. AB 146 attempts to give our state agencies all the tools they need to protect and improve water quality by regulating diffuse sources of pollution and by holding polluters accountable. AB 146 would also require the State Environmental Commission to consider disproportionate impacts on historically oppressed or marginalized communities when adopting water quality regulations. This would ensure that water quality benefits and improvements are shared by all Nevadans, and that no community is unfairly subjected to higher pollution levels or lower water quality. People in communities across Nevada benefit from having clean water to drink. Surface water accounts for about 60% of the state's water supply. Reducing pollution from non-point sources would improve water quality across the state, resulting in cleaner drinking water, lower water treatment costs, and safer water for outdoor recreation activities. We'd like to thank Assemblywoman Peters for bringing this important piece of legislation forward, and we urge the committee's support. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Cabrera. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 146.
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 146, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits 864. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, this is Nina Laxalt, NEENALAXALT, speaking on behalf of Jeff Fontaine and the Central Nevada Regional Water Authority and the Humboldt River Water Authority. And we appreciate Assemblywoman Peters working with all the stakeholders and she making some changes to her original legislation on AB 146 and believe that her conceptual amendment gets us closer to meeting the goal of effectively addressing non-point source diffuse pollution. However, without more detailed language on how maximum daily load standards would be developed and implemented, they are exposed to AB 146. It is important for water users in CNRWA and HRBWA, so that's Central Nevada Regional Water Authority and Humboldt River Basin Water Authority, 9 member counties, to understand the proposed changes and possible impacts. Both authorities support addressing non-point source diffuse pollution through education, incentives, and best management practices, and are committed to working with Assemblywoman Peters to enhance existing efforts. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Laxalt. We'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits 068. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, my name is Wade Polson. I am the General Manager of Lincoln County Water District. My name is spelled WADEPOULSEN. I'd like to thank the chair and this committee for allowing us to provide comments in opposition to AB 146. Lincoln County Water District is opposed to AB 146 as currently written, but we support the idea of addressing diffuse. As the current conceptual amendment gets us closer to supporting, it does not go far enough in outlining a voluntary incentive program to allow individuals and companies to volunteer into programs that limit diffuse rather than across the board and all-encompassing regulation. We support the language and idea to exempt agriculture and septic systems from regulation of diffuse that we consider to be currently unmeasurable and crippling financially to those that choose to make their living off the land. Agriculture is important to Lincoln County economically, and we look forward to increasing agricultural growth within our county. Again, Lincoln County Water District can support any program or policy that becomes a voluntary program through incentives, but opposes any language that will become all-encompassing regulation. Thank you again for this opportunity to provide comments in opposition to AB 146.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Polson. We'll go on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits 000. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Parrish, STEVEN PARRISH. Good afternoon, Chairman Watts, members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I'm the General Manager and the Chief Engineer of the Clark County Regional Flood Control District located in Southern Nevada. We reviewed AB 146 and wrote a letter to Assemblywoman Peters expressing opposition to sections 2, 3, 10, and 11 of this bill. Subsequently, we have been in communication with Assemblywoman Peters, and she's presented proposed revisions to the bill that, if included in a formal amendment, would resolve our concerns. I would like to thank Assemblywoman Peters for the engagement and effort to work with us to mitigate those concerns expressed in our comment letter and written testimony. Although we remain in opposition to this legislation pending the amendment, we believe we will be able to revise our position from opposed to neutral upon review of the amendment once submitted. That concludes my testimony, and thank you for your service, your time, and the opportunity to speak this afternoon on this proposed legislation.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Parrish. We'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits 456. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. My name is Ed James. That's ED James. I am the general manager for the Carson Water Sub-Conservancy District. We are opposed to Assembly Bill 146 as it's currently written, not to the goals of the bill, but the uncertainty of how the new language may be used to try to achieve water quality standards in the Carson River watershed. I would like to note that for the past 20 years, CWSD and our partners have been working on many projects to try to improve water quality in the Carson River watershed. During this period, one of our most important critical partners is in the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. For your information, there are no direct discharge to the Carson River. The main water quality issues on the Carson River has to do with non-point sources. These sources come from bank erosion, ag and urban runoff, climate change, and other issues. The concern we have with the bill is how it will be used. An example has to do with Section 10.1 on page 8. The current beneficial use designation for the upper Carson River is cold water fishery. Years ago, we looked at ways to try to achieve this beneficial use for cold water fishery, but found it very difficult. One of the main issues was during dry years, the water temperature flowing into Nevada did not meet the cold water fishery requirements. Another issue in the Carson River can go dry in many places due to agricultural diversions. It's hard to maintain cold water fishery when you have no water. Unlike the Truckee River, we have very limited upstream storage in the Carson River that could augment river flows. We looked at the possibility of purchasing some ag rights to be dedicated for in-stream flows. However, we found out that there was to get enough water to maintain adequate flows in dry years would require drying up all the agriculture in Carson Valley. Another concern we have has to do with proposed
Mr. James,
concept
you're at 2
amendment.
minutes, so if you can please begin to wrap up your testimony.
Okay, well, thank you for your time. We're willing to work with you to make this a better bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll go on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits 294. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Chairman Watts, members of the committee, for the record, Callie Wilsey with the City of Reno. That's CALLIWIL, S as in Sam, EY. I'm also testifying on behalf of the Urban Consortium, which includes the cities of Las Vegas, Henderson, Sparks, and Reno. We had a very productive meeting with the bill sponsor yesterday and greatly appreciate Assemblywoman Peters taking the time to meet with us and explain her intent for the bill. Just simply as the rules dictate, we're here in opposition today as we had concerns about the language as introduced. The broad language of the bill initially raised concerns about how this would impact the operations of existing municipal programs and the potential fiscal impact to enact new regulations. However, following our conversation with the bill sponsor, our understanding is that AB 146 is not intended to create a new program with additional mandated regulations that would impact local governments, but rather give NDEP broader discretion to look at ways to improve water quality across the state and to spur innovation in the field. We appreciate the bill sponsor's vision for improved water quality and her willingness to continue to work with us to refine the language in the amendment. We really look forward to those discussions. Thanks for the opportunity to provide testimony this afternoon.
Thank you for your comments. We'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits 232. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on AB 146. For the record, my name is David Dazlich, D-A-Z-L-I-C-H. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Vegas Chamber. The Vegas Chamber is testifying in opposition to AB 146 today. We are concerned about the broad nature as written and how this bill would potentially interact with the many state and federal water programs, including the Safe Water Drinking Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Nevada Water Pollution Control Law. We feel this bill fails to recognize Nevada's longstanding requirement concerning anti-degradation of groundwater, and we are concerned about how this proposed legislation would fit in context of other NDEP programs such as mining. For these reasons, we are in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits 109, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Justin Harrison, Justin Harrison, representing Clark County. Although we are appearing today in opposition due to the current version of the bill, we would like to thank Assemblywoman Peters for the work she's done with our Southern Nevada dischargers who will be testifying in neutral as those concerns have been mitigated. However, we would like to echo the comments of Mr. Steve Parrish from the Regional Flood Control District and echo his comments. As an MS4 permittee in Southern Nevada, we still do have some technical issues with the current version of the bill, but hope to continue to work through Regional Flood Control and with Assemblywoman Peters to mitigate those concerns and eventually support the bill. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Harrison. We'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
For those that have recently joined us, we are on opposition for Assembly Bill 146. Please press star 9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 149, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits 149, please press star 6 to unmute and you may begin. Caller with the last three digits 323, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits 323, please press star 6 to unmute and you may begin. I apologize, Chair. It seems that we have no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. I'd also like to note for the record and make the Secretary aware that Assemblywoman Carlton is present. With that, we'll move on to testimony in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 146.
To testify in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 146, please press star 9 now to enter the queue. Caller with the last three digits 349, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, my name is Doug Busselman, D-O-U-G-B-U-S-S-E-L-M-A-N. I'm the Executive Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau. We are testifying today in neutral on AB 146 with the understanding that we are basing this position on the conceptual amendments that Assemblywoman Peters has proposed. We want to thank Assemblywoman Peters for her willingness for us to participate in an exchange of ideas and arriving where we believe that we now are on AB 146. Prior to her sharing her conceptual amendment, we would not have been able to testify neutral. Nevada Farm Bureau has strong policy in favor of dealing with diffuse, or in our terms, non-point source impairments of water quality, with voluntary, incentive-based best management practices being what should be used. We believe and have said as much in our follow-up with Assemblywoman Peters that the conceptual amendment takes us off of a road we could not have gone down, bringing us back to a non-regulatory approach for diffuse sources. We look forward to continuing to be part of the further discussions as the conceptual amendment takes the form of language and details are incorporated into areas where there still needs to be greater clarification. Thank you for this opportunity to share our perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Busselman, for your comments. We'll continue with callers in the queue. I do want to note that the Division of Environmental Protection is joining us by Zoom, but we'll start with anybody else on the phones that wishes to testify in the neutral position on AB 146.
Caller with the last three digits 256. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. We will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Chris Mahana, spelled ChrisMahannah. I'm here on behalf of Churchill County, testifying neutral due to the conceptual amendments that Assemblywoman Peters put forward, which greatly improves the bill. However, we do still have some concerns. Churchill County owns, operates, and maintains a municipal water system that is supplied with underground water that is totally recharged by irrigation practices and delivery practices associated with the Newlands Reclamation Project. So any potential regulation on diffuse sources associated with ag and the recharge that provides would be of concern, and we look forward to working through those issues. And just to pile on Doug's comments, if it was voluntary incentive programs, we would be in support of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll move on to the next caller in neutral.
Caller with the last three digits 455. Please press *6 to unmute. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, I am Daniel Fisher, Daniel Fischer. I'm the Deputy General Manager of the Clark County Water Reclamation District. Chair Watts and Assembly Natural Resources Committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak on AB 146. The Clark County Water Reclamation District collects and treats 100 million gallons of wastewater per day and returns most of the resulting reclaimed water to Lake Mead by way of the Las Vegas Wash. In doing so, we prevent 300 tons of pollutants per day from reaching the environment. In collaboration with the other three major dischargers, wastewater treatment agencies in Southern Nevada, we wrote a letter to Assemblywoman Peters opposing portions of Section 3 and 10. She responded with a proposed conceptual amendment, which we've been talking about here today, for AB 146, which fully addresses our issues. As a result, the position of the district on AB 146 is now neutral. We're very thankful for Assemblywoman Peters for listening to our concerns and making improvements to AB 146. Thank you for your time and your service to our great state of Nevada in the Assembly.
Thank you for your comments. We'll move on to the next person wishing to provide neutral testimony on AB 146.
Caller with the last three digits 438. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chairman Watts and members of the committee. I am Jennifer Ott, JenniferOtt, Director of the Nevada Department of Agriculture, and I'm calling today to testify in neutral on AB 146. The department appreciates Assemblywoman Peters involving us in the conversation for this bill. The department has responsibilities in partnering with the Environmental Protection Agency on pesticide issues, including monitoring water around the state for pesticide contamination. Although the department's role is relatively minor compared to the Division of Environmental Protection, who you'll still hear from, I appreciate the Assemblywoman's comments on introduction regarding non-point source pollution and her work on the conceptual amendment. We'll continue to be available to assist with any language that will affect our responsibilities in the areas we regulate. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Director Ott, for your testimony. we'll go on to see if there are other callers wishing to provide neutral testimony.
Caller with the last three digits, 112. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Chairman Watts, this is Alan Biaggi with the Nevada Mining Association. I had signed up in the opposition, but was not called. May I provide my testimony at this time?
Yes, you may, Mr. Biaggi. We know that there's technical difficulties at times, so go ahead and we'll briefly move back to testimony in opposition for Assembly Bill 146. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Watts and committee members. My name is Alan Biaggi, ALLEN-BIAGGI, and I represent the Nevada Mining Association. To begin, the association would like to thank Assemblywoman Peters for her commitment to preserving Nevada's surface and groundwater. We share those values, and the industry works very hard to protect our precious water resources. While we are not in support of the bill at this time, we greatly appreciate the conceptual amendments Assemblywoman Peters has put forward. They go a long way to addressing many of our concerns, including issues related to diffuse sources, the bonding provisions, and retaining the ability and flexibility of NDEP and the State Environmental Commission to address water quality standards and beneficial uses. We look forward to more detail on the definitions of disproportionate impacts and historically oppressed marginalized communities, and how the implementing agency can review biological, cultural, and wildlife resources in the context of NRS 445A 490. We still have concerns regarding the duplication of the bill's language with existing state programs in the areas of underground injection control, infiltration, and the establishment of numerical standards for diffuse sources. Existing pollution controls must remain strong, and we must ensure provisions of AB 146 do not unnecessarily complicate those efforts or work in opposition to the Federal Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, or Nevada's very strong Nevada Water Pollution Control Law. We are committed to working with Assemblywoman Peters to better understand the provisions of 146, eliminate duplication, and identify ways to ensure Nevada's surface and groundwaters are protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biaggi, for your remarks. We'll go on to the next caller.
For those that have joined recently, we are on testimony in the neutral position for AB 146. Please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 323. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, my name is Steve Walker, STVEWALKER. I'm in the same position as Mr. Biaggi. I tried to testify against the bill and was cut off. Excuse me, and was cut off. I'm representing Eureka County on the bill. Eureka County has also been working with Assemblywoman Peters, and we're pleased with the results of the conceptual amendment. We would look for the formal amendment before we would move to neutral, but we think we're heading in the right direction. We'd also like to support, what's going on with the NPS provisions with the state right now seem to be working, and echoing Mr. Biaggi's statement, I think that the bill is duplicate of a lot of those efforts, and we support the ongoing efforts. And maybe if they would be enhanced, we would not need the bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll have that classified also as opposition testimony. With that, we'll go back to testimony in neutral on Assembly Bill 146. See if we have anyone else in the queue.
Chair, I believe we have no more callers in neutral at this moment.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience at the Division of Environmental Protection. We'll now turn it over to you to make your testimony in neutral.
Thank you very much, Chairman Watts. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm Jennifer Carr, Deputy Administrator of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, or NDEP, and I'm testifying as neutral on AB 146. AB 146 directs changes to several of NDEP's water quality programs. NDEP identified concerns with the original bill, and we appreciate the Assemblywoman's work on her conceptual amendment to resolve many of our concerns. However, we do still have some remaining concerns and questions. A primary concern is to protect Nevada's federal funding for our non-point source program. The funding is leveraged at over 2 times the $1 million we receive annually from the US EPA and goes on to important stream protection and restoration projects. This federal funding is contingent upon a non-regulatory program. The conceptual amendment to remove requirements to establish a new program alleviates some of this concern. However, if the bill retains establishment of numeric limits or shifts to a total maximum daily load type program, it could still result in permit limits or regulatory controls, resulting in the unintended consequence of being interpreted as a regulatory program, disqualifying Nevada from using some of these federal funds. NDEP also had concerns relating to managing domestic wastewater, such as septic systems or municipal treatment plants that are inherently a quote-unquote contaminated fluid. The conceptual amendment proposes to exempt septic systems from the new provisions, but this may swing too far in the other direction. Septic systems are identified as a potential contaminant source in community planning documents for wellhead protection, and an exemption of them would not help these communities make progress towards individual community-based solutions. NDEP would like to find a balance. Finally, NDEP is encouraged by conceptual amendments to add new detail to the concepts of protecting disproportionate impacts in historically oppressed and marginalized communities. NDEP seeks more specifics on these terms to set clear expectations for program implementation and to assess resources needed if they continue to be included. NDEP also seeks clarity through amendment on terms to ensure permits protect biological, cultural, or wildlife resources included in the initial bill, which also prohibits NDEP from issuing a permit that does not ensure protection of these undefined resources. NDEP is available to work through amendment language. The expansion of water quality protection concepts in this bill are interwoven with several areas of existing law, as you've heard this afternoon, and they create complexities which NDEP can help explain. Thank you for your time. We will submit a more detailed testimony in writing for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have questions for NDEP? All right, seeing none, thank you again. With that, I believe I will close testimony on Assembly Bill 146 and turn the floor back over to Assemblywoman Peters for any closing comments or remarks she'd like to make.
Thank you, Chair Watts. Assemblywoman Sarah Peters. For the record, I just want to direct the committee's attention to the variety of jurisdictions that testified today. All of those jurisdictions are involved in water treatment and management in the state of Nevada. This is a very complex area and it touches everybody. That is part of the importance of being able to talk about and look towards solutions for these kinds of dynamic issues that our state has to deal with. Additionally, everyone who testified in opposition has highlighted the cost of treating to drinking water standards and that it's prohibitive. Let that sink in. It is also important to identify that all of those who've spoken today have the same goals: to keep Nevada waters clean and accessible to Nevadans for all uses in perpetuity. Additionally, I would like to thank the stakeholders who've reached out and offered comments and worked with me through the last couple of weeks as we tried to get somewhere amicable in this bill. I also want to extend a great thanks to the staff, Mr. Amburn and Mr. Steinsbeck, who have helped me immensely in developing the conceptual amendments and the testimony for this committee. Lastly, I'd like to thank you all for listening today, for hearing this bill. And if you have any questions regarding this issue, please do not hesitate to reach out to me and others who have testified today. We are happy to answer any questions you may have on this issue.
Thank you very much for the presentation of this bill and for your work. I believe that it comes through in the testimony that was provided, and we look forward to seeing the results of those continued conversations and potential development of additional amendment language moving forward. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 146. And I would actually like to move our agenda around briefly and go to our work sessions now that we have all members present. So with that, we will move to our work session. We have two bills up for work session today. First, we have Assembly Bill 89, which revises provisions relating to wildlife. And I will, as usual with work sessions, we are not reopening the hearing on the bill, but we do have some folks that may be able to clarify any questions that arise. With that, Mr. Stinisbeck, will you please walk us through the work session for Assembly Bill 89?
Thank you, Chair Watts. For the record, Jan Stinisbeck with the Research Division of the LCB. As previously mentioned, as LCB staff, I can advocate for or against any measure comes before this committee. Assembly Bill 89, the first bill on the work session today, was heard in this committee on March 8th. The bill authorizes the Board of Wildlife Commissioners of the Department of Wildlife to establish a program which authorizes any person to transfer his or her big game tag to a qualified organization for use by a person who is 16 years or younger and who is otherwise eligible to hunt or who has a disability or life-threatening medical condition. Cal Davis, on behalf of the Coalition for Nevada Wildlife, proposed an amendment which makes the following changes. It provides that a qualified organization is a non-profit organization that demonstrates in its application, among other things, that it first provides opportunities to engage in various experiences to a person who has disability, life-threatening medical condition, or secondly, provides opportunities to engage in various experiences to a person who is 16 years or younger. And lastly, the amendment also provides that extenuating circumstances does include death. And behind the bill page, you'll find Mr. Davis' proposed amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stinisbeck. Are there any questions from members on Assembly Bill 89? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion to amend and do pass.
So moved. McCohen.
Thank you. We have a motion from Vice Chair Cohen.
Second.
I believe we had a second from Assemblywoman Hanson. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, will you please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen. Yes. Assemblyman Ellison.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Yes.
Chair Watts.
Yes. Thank you very much. That motion carries unanimously. And I will assign the floor statement to Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the second item on our work session for today, and that is Assembly Bill 103, which revises provisions governing the preservation of certain prehistoric sites. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Stinisbeck to walk us through the work session on AB 103.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Jan Stinisbeck. Assembly Bill 103 was heard in this committee also on March 8th, and the bill revises provisions relating to permits to excavate on private lands that are known to contain prehistoric Indian burial sites. Specifically, this bill provides that such a permit is not required to engage in certain lawful activities in those private lands if those activities are, first of all, exclusively for a purpose other than the excavation of a prehistoric Indian burial site, and secondly, occur only on a portion of the private lands that does not contain the known prehistoric Indian burial site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Skinnisbeck. I'd also just like to, before we go into any additional questions or discussion, note that we did receive after the hearing a couple of letters and some proposals from the Division of Museums and History. Again, they did not participate in the hearing or reach out. We did not get these documents until yesterday. And the main issue was a lack of clarity around the use of the word known in the proposed additional language. So I know we have Ms. McDade Williams here as well as Assemblywoman Martinez, the sponsor of the bill. And so I'd just like to ask again if you can clarify your intent, which is that the use of the word known in the new language in the bill is referencing the existing statute seen in Section 1, Subsection 1, and is not intended to create any new standard outside of currently existing law.
Chair, you are correct.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Martinez, for the clarification. Members, is there any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to do pass.
So moved.
Thank you. I've got a motion to do pass from Vice Chair Cohen. I believe I had a second from Assemblywoman Titus.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, will you please conduct the roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Brown May,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
Yeah.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
Yes.
Chair Watts.
Thank you very much. That motion passes. And I will assign the floor statement on Assembly Bill 103 to Assemblywoman Martinez.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. Now we will move back to the last major item on our agenda for today, which is the hearing on Assembly Bill 148. Assembly Bill 148 revises provisions governing mining. I'd like to open up the hearing and turn the floor back over to Assemblywoman Peters. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Watts and members of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. I am putting you through a lot today with both water and mining on the agenda, so thanks for hanging in there with me. For the record, I am Sarah Peters, representing Assembly District 24 in Washoe County. It's my pleasure to present Assembly Bill 148, which revises provisions governing permits to engage in an exploration project or mining operation. Before I begin, I would like to note that I'm proposing an amendment which should be available on Nellis, and I also think I sent that out to everyone on the committee earlier today. With the chair's permission, I will provide brief background information and a summary of the bill as introduced, and then we'll move on to discuss the proposed amendment. The United States economy highly depends on minerals for producing everything from housing materials to electric vehicles. Nevada is the top mineral producing state in the U.S., and Nevada mining contributes $11.2 billion to Nevada's economy in 2019. However, along with the opportunity to access Nevada's valuable mineral resources comes the responsibility for mining operators to properly remediate and reclaim their mining operations in our state. Minerals are finite resources, and at the end of a mining operation, it becomes crucial to reclaim the site to ensure that it is safe, stable, and does not have any negative impacts on our water resources or the surrounding environment. In order to protect the environment and to ensure that the state does not have to pay the cost for reclamation mines, under current law, a mining operator must submit to the state a bond to pay for these reclamation efforts before it can start mining. Assembly Bill 148 seeks to further protect Nevada by making it harder for bad actors that have previously defaulted on such bonds to participate in exploration or mining operations. As such, AB 148 prohibits the issuance of an exploration or mining permit to any applicant that is a corporation or other business entity if any of its listed principal officers have previously been listed as the principal officer of a corporation or business entity that has defaulted on any obligation relating to reclamation. However, the bill authorizes the issuance of such a permit if the applicant pays the full amount of the defaulted obligation and demonstrates that the conditions which led to the default have been remedied and no longer exist. Before I go into the amendment, I want to acknowledge that I sent out the wrong amendment to some folks, some of the stakeholders. It's my fault. So they received an inaccurate amendment. I did send out the amendment you all received with some remedy discussion about the difference between the two, but I think that that will be reflected in the testimony that you'll hear today on this bill. As previously mentioned, you should all have access to the proposed amendment on Nellis. Among other things, the amendment seeks to clarify provisions to further strengthen the protections provided in the bill. The proposed amendment defines person with a controlling interest to mean a person who owns or controls a majority of the voting stock or holds any other controlling interest directly or indirectly in the corporation or other business entity that gives the person the power to direct management or determine policy, or is a partner, principal officer, director, or trustee. The proposed amendment also provides that the prohibition against being issued a permit applies to a person with a controlling interest in certain corporations or business entities. Lastly, the proposed amendment provides that the prohibition against being issued a permit applies to an applicant who is not in good standing with the applicable federal agency governing mining or in any state or territory of the United States. Again, I want to point out that I've been working extensively with stakeholders on this bill, working with NDEP on ensuring that we are defining accurately and giving enough information to NDEP for them to feel comfortable in the application of this piece of legislation, and working with the mining industry and exploration folks on their comfort level of who is defined as a potential bad actor or not. I also want to point out that there are other states that have adopted this type of legislation, and the point of the prohibition against being issued a permit if you are not in good standing with other permits is related to reciprocity for our state with other states that have similar legislation. And with that, I'm open to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I believe we will start with Assemblywoman Titus for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this forward. As everyone knows, in my backyard, actually it's in my front yard, we have the Anaconda Pit. And when those folks left, they walked away and left this hole, and we've been spending decades trying to figure out who owns it and who's going to fix it. So conceptually, I am all about going after bad actors. My question on the bill is, who will maintain, is there already some sort of database on who has defaulted, who's walked away? How will they find it? Will the department have to run background checks on folks? And where is this information available, number one? Number two, how long does it take to get something? Will it delay an application by a year, by 2 years, by 3 years? Number two question. Number three question is, once they find it, then they'll retract if they had issued it, or will it hold up issuance of the permits? So is there a reasonable amount of time to do this, gather this data?
Excellent questions, Assemblywoman Peters. For the record, in working with legal staff and NDEP today, we discussed the option of an affidavit that goes with a permit from the corporation saying that they are in good standing with other permits and that they have not defaulted on these. reclamation obligations in other states and other jurisdictions. The state of Nevada does have a rather robust database. I don't know if it's a database. You can ask NDEP about that, but they do have a record of those reclamation bonding efforts and the obligation to do that reclamation on all mines in the state of Nevada. So we have that information for the state, but that federal piece would, I think, be most applicable through an affidavit process with some kind of penalty if they lie on affidavit.
Right, I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't want the gaming industry. They don't give you a permit if you're a bad actor in gaming. So I understand that. I just wasn't sure how all that was going to work. I like the idea of an affidavit at the time application that you're just asking, hey, and then obviously, hey, if you lied on this, then there's consequences. So I appreciate that.
And that way we address, Sarah Peter for the record, we address the timeline issue as well, because we don't want good actors to be punished for bad actors if we can help it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question, and thank you for the answers.
Thank you. I believe Vice Chair Cohen has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the presentation. I have a question about forfeiting the surety, and maybe this is my lack of understanding about how sureties really work. But if a company forfeits the surety, isn't that making our state whole? And if so, why are we asking them to continue to make payments after the forfeiture of the surety? Or am I misunderstanding about sureties, and they're much less of an amount than I think they are? See what I'm asking?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Sarah Peters, for the record. We've actually been going back and forth with NDEP on this issue as well. And I want to offer two ideas that we've been discussing. The first is that there are cases in which a project becomes non-solvent, right, where they are no longer making enough money to sustain themselves, and thereby they forfeit the surety because they can't pay for the reclamation themselves, right? And that's part of why we have those bonds in place in the first place. The second is just walking away. And there are, that would be the case of a bad actor. Additionally, the obligation of proving that I'm going to look for the specific language, so I give you what it says. The demonstration to the division that any conditions which led to the default have been remedied can be addressed in that scenario as well. So if the default company that couldn't afford to do the reclamation of their project was able to prove that they are solvent, or that the folks who have moved into a different company can prove that the company that they work with now is solvent, then I think they meet that obligation. The second one, the true walks away, right? That's a different scenario that they would have to demonstrate to the different conditions under which they walked away from their reclamation obligation that the state ended up paying for through that surety has been remedied. And I think that's an excessive obligation that would result in really identifying who those players are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, I do have a brief question. Do you know, has there been any discussion of a scenario where bad actor could be defined by their health and safety practices? And I know that, you know, a lot of that falls to OSHA essentially, but could you just speak to that?
Yes, thank you. Sarah Peters for the record. So most of that actually falls to MSHA in the state of Nevada, which has more significant obligations than OSHA does and more specific to the mining industry. I did not put into this that provision, and I'm willing to entertain it, but I'm not sure of its germaneness, so I would have to go through legal for that one. And it's not a discussion that I've had with stakeholders on this issue as well. I think, yeah, I would like to have a deeper conversation on that one. I have not had that conversation yet.
Thank you for that. And I'm not trying to add potentially problematic elements to the bill. Really just a question out of curiosity. I know that some of the other states have really focused on obligations for cleanup costs, but I was just thinking about other obligations that good actors in a sector have, and one of those is to protect the health and safety of their employees. So thank you for the candid answer on that. I believe we do have a question from Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I did type in. It must went to the wrong area again. But I do have one to the presenter. In my area, which is a lot of mines, and they're big gold mines, and they pay into the redoing of the pits and stuff. The ones that you're talking about, how old is these? Because have you got anything in the last 50 years, or is there newer ones that I don't know about, like the smaller ones that Robin was talking about, or Ms. Titus? I just haven't seen any things walked away from in my areas for many years. Could you explain that?
Assemblywoman Peters, for the record, this isn't directed at any individual project or issue that is identified today. There are historic cases and recent historic cases in most of the other states, in which case this has become a problem for those communities who are left behind with the burden of that reclamation. State of Nevada has been pretty active in ensuring that reclamation and environmental stewardship is a huge component of the mining industry and their obligation to the state. But this is an additional prohibition on the industry players who may choose to attempt to abuse loopholes in our programs and gain monetary values for stakeholders that are not in the best interest of our communities.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Ellison.
Thank you. And I know that the mines are probably the best stewards there ever was of the county now. And as far as I've been around, they've been really good. They pay into the system, but you're going to go back and try to find the ones that haven't and make them be responsible. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Peters, for the record. The intention was not established to become retroactive. That would be up to NDEP if they would like to create a list of players who have forfeited their sureties in the past. But that was not the purpose of the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Peters.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? All right. Seeing none, we will begin. We'll open up testimony on Assembly Bill 148. We'll start with testimony in support, and I will turn it back over to Broadcast Production Services to see if we have anybody in the queue wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 148.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on Assembly Bill 148, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Call-in user 1, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, this is John Hatter, members of the committee. Last name Hatter, Hadder. I am the executive director of Great Basin Resource Watch, testifying in support of AB 148. Great Basin Resource Watch is a Reno-based nonprofit public interest organization We monitor mining and extractive industries in the Great Basin, primarily in Nevada since 1995. We support communities to protect their land, air, water and culture from the adverse effects of mining and other extractive industries. Modern mining is generally a very destructive activity to the environment, which means that the permitting process needs to be done carefully and judiciously. One of the most important aspects of the permitting process is the plan for reclamation of the area so that one day it can be returned to a post-mining use. There are good examples of reclamation in Nevada, and there have been mines that have been abandoned or poorly run, leaving behind a mess for the public to pay for and to try to clean up. Reclamation is best when done concurrently with active mining, and better results are obtained when the operator has been responsible in the operation of the mine and is not in violation of our environmental standards. AB 148 complements our existing regulations to decrease the number of mines that will be poorly run and by identifying what are called bad actors. Great Basin Resource Watch supports the amended language that the company needs to be in good standing in both reclamation and other mining regulations in order to cite a new mining operation or permit the expansion of an existing operation. Thank you very much for your time and this opportunity to present comment.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Hatter. We'll move on to the next caller wishing to provide testimony in support.
Caller with the last three digits, 130. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINESAUNDERS. I'm the Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada in support of Assembly Bill 148. Assembly Bill 148 will help ensure accountability for mine corporations by holding the individuals responsible for contamination from operating any mines in the state until sufficient remediation occurs. Similar legislation recently passed in Colorado, and Montana has had this in place since 1989, which they again updated the law in 2001. The most well-known application of this law was in response to a company called Pegasus Gold, who in 1998 went bankrupt, leaving Montana saddled with over $35 million in cleanup costs for abandoned pollution. These mines polluted surrounding waterways with cyanide, arsenic, and other contaminants, prompting water treatment measures that may be needed permanently. Mining contamination has long-term impacts to the health of Nevadans, particularly women's reproductive health. And we cannot hold mining bad actors accountable. It is public funding that is required to clean them up. This is a common sense policy which will only impact bad actors who disregard their legal obligations, and we urge your support.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Saunders. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits, 783. Please press *6 to unmute. You please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. Hello, Chairman Watts, members of the committee. My name is Brian Beffert. I am B-R-I-A-N, last name B-E-F-F as in Frank, O-R-T as in Tom. I am the director of the Sierra Club in Nevada, and I speak today on behalf of the club's 40,000 members and supporters statewide in favor of AB 148. This common sense bill would protect Nevada's taxpayers from absorbing unnecessary cleanup costs incurred by known defaulters. It would help protect communities near mines from pollution unnecessarily left by irresponsible mining officers. Finally, AB 148 would increase public accountability for the industry and incentivize mining officers to respect environmental laws and regulations. I would also like to support and amplify the statements from Plan just previously on the success that a similar bad actor bill has had in Montana with the Pegasus company, and encourage all of you to vote yes on AB 148. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Beffert. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Caller with the last three digits, 080. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Susan Fisher, Susan Fisher, with McDonald Carano, speaking in favor of AB 148 on behalf of American Battery Technology Company, which is working in tandem with Lithium America. We support AB 148 with the amendment as presented today and appreciate Assemblywoman Peters for scrambling to get us the correct amendment earlier this afternoon. The state and INDEP does a great job of protecting our state, and the very few bad actors out there cast a pall over the entire industry. For that reason, American Battery Technology Company supports AB 148 with the proposed amendment they have in front of you today. And with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, I would like to also state that the board and membership of the Nevada Mineral Exploration Coalition has not yet had a chance to review the amendment that we received today. So at this time, they are neutral on the bill as written, but I will advise the bill sponsor and your committee membership if that position changes upon further review. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Fisher. We'll go on to the next caller in support. And please make note of the neutral testimony that Ms. Fisher referenced at the end of her remarks. With that, we'll go on to additional testimony in support.
Caller with the last three digits 155, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI, I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League. I'd like to echo the comments made by previous speakers from Great Basin Resource Watch, Plan, and the Sierra Club. AB 148 will protect Nevada's environment and taxpayers from future degradation and expensive reclamation by holding bad actors accountable, and we urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next caller in support.
For those that have joined recently, we are on support for Assembly Bill 148. Please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits 427, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, this is Stevie Applewhite, STEVIEAPPLEWHITE, and I'm the Hub Coordinator for Centers Movement Reno. I'd first like to thank all the members of the Assembly that have introduced AB 148. It is about time that we started clapping down on corporations and entities that have defaulted on their obligations that they agreed to when coming into our state, taking our resources and profiting off them, and then leaving us with the cost of cleaning it up. With that, I voiced my profound support of this bill. Thank you and have a lovely St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you, and you as well. We'll move on to the next caller in support.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you very much, BTS. With that, we'll move on to testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 148.
To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 148, please press *9 now. Caller with the last three digits 738, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Watts, Natural Resource Committee members. My name is Nikki Bailey Lundahl, NIKKIBAILEY-Lundahl, LUNDAHL, and I'm here today representing the Nevada Mining Association. Thank you for allowing us to testify on AB 148, and thank you, Assemblywoman Peters, for working with us on the bill language. The association at this time is in opposition to the bill. We have not had time to properly vet the amendment. Nevada has one of the premier mining regulatory programs in the United States and in the world. It is not in the best interest of the industry to allow individuals or companies with poor environmental records to operate in the state. More importantly, having these kinds of individuals operate in Nevada is not in the interest of human health or our unique environment. A concern we had with the language was who is subject to the bill's provisions and the role they had in corporate or operational structure of a mine in violation of environmental reclamation and bonding requirements. We feel we need to have much more discussion on definition of person with controlling interest. This definition is critical to fair and meaningful legislation. We still have some concerns regarding the scope of violations and the jurisdictions where they occur. We will continue to work with Assemblywoman Peters on those issues with an eye towards achieving language that is equitable and achieves the goal of ensuring regulatory compliance of all operators in Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Bailey-Lundahl, and I would encourage you, once you've had the opportunity to review the amendment, to share your thoughts on it with the sponsor and with the members of this committee. With that, we'll move on to the next caller in opposition.
Chair, it seems that we have no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to testimony in the neutral position on Assembly Bill 148.
To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 148, please press *9 now to enter the queue. Chair, it seems there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. With that, we will close testimony, and I will turn it back over to
Watts. Sorry to interrupt. NDP would like to testify in neutral.
Thank you, Mr. Lovato. I forgot about the folks on Zoom. Go ahead, Mr. Lovato, whenever you're ready. Please provide neutral testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Watts, members of the committee. Greg Lovato, Administrator of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, testifying neutral on AB 148. We appreciate the intent of the bill to prevent issuance of a mine reclamation permit to any person who has defaulted on reclamation obligations. We have identified implementation concerns with the bill as introduced, and we are still reviewing amendments from the bill sponsor to see if our concerns have been addressed. It is very important to make sure we have specifically defined who would be subject to the prohibition on issuance of a permit. The bill as introduced refers to principal officers. A definition of principal officer is not provided in NRS 519, and the definitions of corporate officer in NRS 78.130 related to private corporations refer to other persons whose titles appear to be up to the corporation to determine. Stepping back, holding individuals responsible for environmental actions or inactions of corporations is an endeavor that may be better informed by further review and modification of corporate rather than environmental law. Also, the bill as proposed does not afford individuals due process for a determination by NDEP that a person has defaulted on past obligations and to deny a permit on that basis. This could present a barrier to implementation. Portions of the bill allow NDEP to issue a permit if the reclamation obligations defaulted on are remedied by the person. This goes to Assemblywoman Cohen's question earlier. Since NDEP does not issue a reclamation permit until financial assurance for reclamation is secured, we have a hard time envisioning a scenario under which the person could remedy a default. If an operator does not reclaim the exploration or mine project, either the bond company would perform reclamation work or NDEP would forfeit the bond and perform the work. So we are not sure how the person who defaulted could remedy the default. As introduced, NDEP has not identified a fiscal impact, with the understanding that NDEP could rely on affidavits rather than performing background searches. We are available for further discussions to clarify bill language, and I am available along with our Mining Bureau Chief, Amy Keys, to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lovato. Are there any questions for the division? I'm not seeing any, so thank you. All right, with that, I will now close testimony and turn it back over to Assemblywoman Peters for any closing remarks that she'd like to make.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Peters, for the record, I just want to thank the committee for your time tonight and for your consideration of AB 148. Again, please let me know if anything comes up, if you have any questions related to the amendment as that language gets fleshed out. Otherwise, I really just appreciate your time. I also want to thank staff. Mr. Amburn and Mr. Steinsbeck have been just invaluable in this process. Really appreciate them as well.
Thank you very much. With that, we will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 148. That brings us to the last item on our agenda for this evening, which is public comment. As a reminder, in order to provide public comment, you must register in advance on the legislative website. We do ask that all commenters limit their remarks to 2 minutes, and this is to comment on other matters not related to the items on our agenda. With that, I'll turn it over to Broadcast Production Services once more to see if we have anybody in the queue wishing to provide public comment.
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no more callers at this time.
All right, thank you very much, Broadcast Production Services, for helping ensure that members of the public could participate in our meeting today. Thank you to everyone who called in and participated, to all of the members for your time, attention, and questions. With that, our next meeting will be on Monday, the 22nd of March at 4 p.m. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.